Welcome to the recorded version of Home Safety, Aging in Place, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Homestead Senior Care. All right, our presenter today and every month is Lakeland Hogan. Lakeland is a gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Homestead Senior Care. Lakeland works to educate professionals, families, and communities on issues older adults face. Lakeland is a doctoral candidate at the University of Nebraska-Omaha, where she is studying social gerontology. She has a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology and Master's in Business Administration from UNO. Lakeland has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for UNO's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. Lakeland serves as Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Dreamweaver Foundation and is active in the Alzheimer's Association's Walk to End Alzheimer's. Lakeland has a passion for helping others, especially aging adults, and their families. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Lakeland Hogan. Lakeland, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Steve. Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm so excited to kick off 2018 with a great webinar series. We have some of our old favorite topics on the 2018 schedule, but we also have some new and exciting topics. And really, it comes from the feedback that we get from all of you. So when you're filling out those surveys or questionnaires at the end of each webinar, we really do take into account what your questions are, what your topic suggestions are, so please always feel free to share that with us. And as you'll see on today's presentation, home safety is one we do every year, but it's so important, and that's why it's a reoccurring theme on our presentation schedule. But this year, I really took your feedback and added in some additional information that you had specific questions on. So you'll see that as we go through today's presentation. But again, home safety is such an important topic because it directly correlates to the quality of life of older adults as they age and as they want to remain at home. So according to a report that's put out by the Home Care Association of America, we know that 90% of older adults want to age in place. And for many, in order to do so safely, they will need to make some sort of modifications to their home. However, we know that this can be a challenging topic for family caregivers to broach with their aging loved one because when they talk about home safety, it starts to affect the person's sense of independence. And if you tuned in last month, we talked about independence and how it's so important to older adults. And when they start to lose that sense of independence, a lot of different emotions are stirred up: fear, anxiety, sadness. So we want to be very cognizant of those feelings as we talk about this. But as professionals, we can help family caregivers have the conversation with their loved ones about home safety, and we can give them tips and tools so that they can have a more confident and productive conversation. So as we go throughout today's presentation, I hope that you're going to take away some great tips and resources. So let's start by talking about today's objectives. Throughout the presentation, we're going to revisit those reasons why home safety is so important. We're also going to talk about the effects that aging has on safety, and this is another way to look at the topic. It may give family caregivers a better understanding of how the aging process can really impact their loved one's safety at home. Then we're also going to identify warning signs that a senior might be struggling and potential dangers in the home. And I'm going to walk us through each room of the house and talk about key safety hazards that we see time and time again. And then I'm going to end with some communication tips for families and lots of resources. I think this is the most resources I've ever had on one of these PowerPoint presentations. So if you haven't already, download the slides because I might have to go through them a little quickly at the end. But I wanted you guys to have all sorts of resources when it comes to this topic because, again, it's so important. Let's talk a little bit further about the importance of home safety before we dive into the statistics. So I want to remind us all that it's really important to educate families about the in-home hazards that could threaten an older adult's independence and then be able to offer them resources to help their aging loved one age in place safely. So we've learned that about 2 million older adults, 65 and older, visit the emergency room each year, and almost a third of those visits are related to injuries, and many of these injuries are sustained in the home. So that's a really big number if you think about it. 2 million older adults visit the ER each year, and many times, about 1 in 3 times, it's due to some sort of injury that happened at home. And now home is supposed to be this place where older adults feel the safest. But as you can see on this graphic here on the screen, sometimes homes can have some hazards. And if families aren't taking a proactive approach to home safety, those hazards really can increase the risk of the older adult safety, could cause falls, and really at the end of the day, it'll reduce the independence of the older adult if a fall were to occur and if they have to be hospitalized or have an injury or sustain an injury that would limit their mobility and so forth. So, pardon me, as we're having these conversations with family caregivers, we just, again, need to communicate the importance of home safety. And in just a little bit, I'm going to walk us through each part of this hazardous home that you see on your screen. But before I do so, I want to talk about some more research that we found when it comes to the topic of home safety. Homestead Inc. surveyed older adults and adult children in the U.S. and Canada, as well as emergency room doctors in both countries. And of the older adults that we surveyed, well over 1/4 of the trips to the hospital or the ER were caused by falls and other household incidents. We also learned that 85% of older adults have done nothing to prepare their homes for aging. That's kind of a scary statistic if we stop and think about it. And I'm sure many of you are not surprised by this if you're professionals in the field. When I sit down with a family for the first time, many of them have not thought through home safety and how little modifications can really help safeguard against accidents in the home. And then when adult children in this survey sat down and considered the safety issues in their loved one's home, about 65% of adult children could identify at least one potential safety issue in their loved one's home. And these safety issues really do range from large issues like a staircase without proper handrails to more of a smaller issue like a pesky rug in the common walkway. But the bottom line is that safety issues can be overwhelming to adult children. And seniors may feel unsafe in their own home, but also might be ashamed to admit or they're embarrassed to ask for help. They might be hesitant because, one, they might be stubborn, or two, they might find that if I admit that I need some help, then my children are automatically going to put me in an assisted living or move me out of my home. But we need to communicate with these family caregivers that we're wanting to prevent that very thing. We want to help them stay in place, aging at home where they want to be, that 90% of them want to be. And sometimes it's really difficult for older adults to admit that they need help and then to actually implement the safety precautions in the home. But the goal is really to avoid these falls and be proactive. So these home modifications, again, are just so important. So on the next slide, we're going to take a look at what ER doctors have to say in terms of statistics. So according to our survey, when an accident does occur in the home, older adults are likely to end up in the emergency room, and we found that ER doctors estimated about half of all home accidents experienced by older adults can be prevented. So again, prevention is key, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through this hour. And when ER doctors are talking to families about these incidents, the most common response was, "We were afraid that something like this would happen." We were afraid something like this would happen. So that tells us right there that families could be doing a lot more to make sure that their senior loved ones are safer at home. And hopefully we can prevent these families from saying that phrase. We were afraid something like this would happen. So again, that proactiveness is so important. And ER doctors also indicated that having support or assistance within the home is beneficial for older adults and really can reduce the risk for accidents. And one of the most common reasons for these incidents in the home are the result of a fall. And so let's talk a little bit more about falls and the stats behind that. Unfortunately, falls are very common among older adults, and many of us who work in this field know that. And falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries for older Americans, according to the National Council on Aging. 1 in 4 older adults fall each year. And if you break that down even further, every 11 seconds an older adult is treated in the emergency room for a fall, and every 19 minutes an older adult dies from a fall or the results of injuries that happened from a fall. Every 19 minutes. That is a frequent number when you stop to think about it. So not only are falls causing injury, they're also very expensive. And these falls can often result in hip fractures, broken bones, and head injuries. And the average cost for an injury related to a fall is in the range of $30,000. So when we think about this and we talk to families about making these modifications to the home, yes, there might be a little bit of a cost associated with the home modification. Maybe it's $100 to install a grab bar. But if we can prevent one fall, that's really in the end saving the older adult financially, but also their physical abilities and their mobility. And falls without injury can carry a heavy burden on the quality of life as well. So once a fall occurs, many older adults develop a fear of falling. And as a result, they limit their activities and social engagements. And this fear of falling can then result in further physical decline, can also result in depression, social isolation, feelings of helplessness. So when we talk about home safety, it's not just about the physical environment that they're in. There is a psychological component, there's a physical component to all of this that we just need to keep in the back of our minds when we're having these conversations. And the impact goes beyond the older adult to the caregiver as well. Research has shown that after a care recipient's first fall, the caregiver reports a significant increase in the caregiving burden. So what that means is, once a fall occurs, the caregiver has to step up and do a lot more for that individual that has had the fall. So it increases the burden, and in some cases, a fall could result in the caregiver falling as well and being injured. And that's probably the worst case scenario. When the older adult is injured and their caregiver is injured, then the situation gets even more complex. So now that we know the stats behind falling, we're going to talk more about the specific risk factors that are associated with falls and then how to prevent these falls. So risk factors can really be broken down into three different categories. We have the physical, behavioral, and environment, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. But the physical factors include the changes that our body is experiencing as a person ages, and these changes can increase our risk for falls. And then we have the behavioral risk factors, and this is the things people do and do not do that increases their risk for falls. And then finally, the environmental factors, and these are the hazards in the living environment or in the community that really can put the older adult at risk for falls. And that's why home safety, again, is such an important topic. And while these risk factors exist, there are preventative measures that people can take, and that's the really good news in all of this. So if we consider the example of mobility, and older adults' movement and the way they get around can really impact their fall risk. So to improve their mobility, there are some things that they can do. First of all, physical activity is really important and can go a long way towards fall prevention. Of course, with the doctor's approval, families should encourage their loved one to be active. Activities such as walking, water aerobics, Tai Chi, those are really some gentle exercises that involve slow, graceful, dance-like movements, and even some simple chair exercises can really go a long way in increasing the older adult's physical abilities. And these activities can also improve their strength, balance, coordination, and flexibility. So when we talk about the Tai Chi and the yogas, that's really going to help them practice their balance and help them become more flexible. Even simple stretching can, again, go a long way in helping them to maintain their mobility. And it's important to keep in mind, though, that some older adults may avoid physical activity because of their fear of falling. And this is where the family could turn to a physical therapist or an activity program that carefully monitors the exercises as they take place, so that it, again, gives the older adult peace of mind, but they can also usually customize these exercise programs to improve things such as the balance and flexibility and the muscle strength that I was mentioning. And I know that something people don't always take into consideration when it comes to falls is medication, but it is really important to consider medication in this whole discussion about falls. Some medicines or a combination of medicines can have side effects such as dizziness or drowsiness, and this can make falling more likely. So if an older adult has started a medication recently and you're noticing that they are having more dizziness or that their balance seems a little off, it could be due to the medication or the combination of medications that they're taking. So it's really important, whether they've just started a new medication or if they've been on the same meds for years, to still do an annual medication review, a regular medication review with the physician or the practitioner and the pharmacist, just to make sure that those drug interactions aren't happening. And again, all of this is related to reducing their risk for falling or for injury, especially in the home. And there are some additional effects of aging that really can impact home safety, and it's ones that older adults might not even think of. So let's talk a little bit more about those effects of aging. So when you talk about aging from the perspective of the five senses, it's a good way to start the conversation with family caregivers. It's something that we've grown up knowing, the five senses. So when we talk about it in this context, it can make it a little more relatable. So the first is eyesight. By the time someone is age 60, the pupils decrease to about 1/3 of the size that they were when they were age 20. So add that to age-related eye conditions such as cataracts or muscular degeneration. Their world could look pretty blurry, or they might have some vision impairments that could prevent them from seeing obstacles in the room, such as throw rugs, electrical cords, and so forth. So it could be really a perfect storm for an accident. So if the loved one has difficulty with their eyesight, try to put yourself in their shoes and think about how the living environment needs to be modified to accommodate those troubles with the eyesight that they're having. Our sense of smell diminishes also. We lose the nerve endings and we have less mucus in our nose as we age. So the biggest concern here is that a senior might not smell gas or smoke or burning food. Again, these are just some things that can put an older adult in danger. So when we think about it from the sense of smell, that could affect our home safety and our environment. And when it comes to taste, we start out with over 10,000 taste buds, and these decrease in number and mass as we age, and medications that some older adults take might also decrease their appetite or affect their sense of taste, which might make the older adult vulnerable to malnutrition. If you think about that, you're like, how does what they eat affect their home safety? Well, if they aren't eating, then they're not maintaining their stamina, their energy levels. They're probably not getting up to exercise, so they're probably losing strength and mobility. And this could ultimately lead to a fall or an accident in the home. Also, they might not be able to taste spoiled foods. So when we're talking about home safety, and we'll talk about this when we get to the kitchen in my little house diagram in a couple slides, that is a safety concern. If they're eating expired foods, it could cause illness. So then when we think about the sense of touch, a decreased blood flow to nerve endings as we age can really reduce an older adult's sensitivity to pain and to temperature. And therefore, older adults might not be able to feel that a water temperature is too hot or too cold. If they are losing feeling in their toes, maybe due to neuropathy, which is usually caused in many older adults by diabetes, they might have an unsteady balance or gait, and this could lead to them tripping. Or losing fingers or feelings in their fingers, could result in not being able to grab the grab bar tighten-ups next to the toilet or in the shower. So I could go on and on about these different things, but again, just trying to get families to think about it from a different perspective. And then the last is our sense of hearing. And our hearing controls our sense of balance. Again, it could be compromised as we age. So older adults can miss In addition, older adults could also miss an important visitor or a service call if they don't hear the doorbell, or worse, they might miss out socializing with their friends or family because they cannot hear the conversation. And this is actually something that I noticed in my own grandma at big family gatherings. Sometimes she's a little more disengaged from the conversation, or she kind of smiles and nods and doesn't actively participate in the conversation. And we realized that her hearing aids needed to be adjusted. So again, those could be some simple modifications that we can make to improve the older adult's life, to improve their quality of life. And again, all tied back to those effects of aging that affect our senses. So now that we know about the stats and we know about the effects that aging can have on home safety, I want to go back to that very hazardous home that I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. And I want to talk about identifying these hazards. So Homestead Inc. has worked with the University of Buffalo to create a home safety checklist. And with that, they created a whole program, Making Home Safer for Seniors.com. And on this website is this interactive tool that you see in front of you. And so you can go onto the website and click each room of the house, which we're going to do here, and you can talk through the different hazards, and it has you identify. So it's kind of like a little game. It makes this a little more fun and entertaining, as much fun as you can have with home safety. But it's a really neat interactive tool, and again, I'm going to walk us through each room of the house. So let's start actually with the outside of the home, because some people don't necessarily think about the effects or the hazards that can exist out there. And especially this time of year, many areas of the country are getting snow. I know here in Omaha we're supposed to have a huge snowstorm tonight and tomorrow. So the inclement weather can really, again, pose some hazards. So we want to make sure that those sidewalks and those driveways are free of snow, free of ice, even uneven cracks in the sidewalks or a couple steps without a handrail could really be a hazard to an older adult. And again, not being able to hear a doorbell or hear a visitor, maybe there's not enough adequate lighting on the front porch. So when they go out to get their mail or to get their newspaper, there's not enough lighting, especially in the winter months when it doesn't get light out until later or it gets darker earlier. They might miss a step, something of that nature. So we want to make sure that the outside of the home is well lit. We want to make sure that the walkways are clear and free of hazards. And then also want to make sure that the older adult can hear or see visitors. And I know that the technology in this area is so great these days. There's little cameras that you can put on the doorbell. There are, of course, loud doorbells that you can install. For those that are hearing impaired, there's a light that can be associated with the doorbell. So lots of different solutions. It's just we just need to get families to step back and think about, where is my loved one struggling the most, and then what are the accessible solutions for these issues. So now let's step inside the home. And in the living room, that is often where older adults spend a lot of their time. It's usually where their television is, where they like to sit and read. Maybe there are lots of pictures and books in this area. So again, a lot of older adults spend a lot of time in the living room, as do many of us. It's where our kids play. It's where we gather, where we watch our favorite show. So we want to make sure that this area is especially safe. So as you can see here, there's a lot of clutter. And I know in the population that we work with, older adults, sometimes we have people who accumulate a lot of special items that might cause some hazards in the home. Maybe it's stacks of newspapers, books, trinkets everywhere. But the most important thing is to make sure that walkways are clear of hazards. Again, these walkways where the older adult is ambulating to and from, those are the key areas we need to focus on. So in the picture, you can see that throw rug at the base of the couch is all messed up because it's causing a tripping hazard. So we need to think about those items on the floor. Again, we also want to think about lighting. Are the light switches accessible? Maybe we need to install some motion sensors or touch lamps, or put some lamps on a timer so that when the older adult wakes up, the lights are already on in the areas that they ambulate to and from, so they don't have to trip over something to get to the light switch. And again, we can try to reduce the clutter in the area to create walkways that are easily accessible. And you might need to rearrange the furniture a little bit, or get some extension cords to get the lamp to the side of the chair that the older adult uses the most so that there's more lighting there. So little things, again, these little things can really make a really big difference in the life of the older adult on a day-to-day basis. So you can kind of, if you're talking with families and like, well, I don't even know where to begin, talk with the older adult about their daily routine. Ask them, what time of day do you usually get up? Where do you spend most of your time? That sort of thing. And that will help get families talking about potential hazards in those different areas. Another area of the home that has some potential hazards is, of course, the kitchen. And this looks, again, like a disastrous situation. There's stuff on fire. There are knives out. So this is probably not the average home, a little dramatic. But, again, wanting to paint a picture of the potential hazards that could occur. So when we think about a kitchen, we want to, as I mentioned earlier, check the refrigerator. Make sure that the pantry is well stocked. Make sure that the older adult has food. But the food that is expired, we want to make sure that that is getting disposed of. So we want to help them maybe create a system of dating items, that sort of thing. You want to think about the accessibility in the kitchen. So oftentimes for older adults, maybe the plates have always been on the middle shelf. That's always been a little maybe too high for them, but that's where they've always been. But if they're reaching up to have to grab that, it could create a potential hazard. Or if they have to get on a chair or a ladder to access something higher, it might be in the older adult's best interest to put that item at a more accessible position within the kitchen. I know some of the older adults I've worked with, for those pots and pans, those heavier items that they use most frequently, we ended up hooking them to the wall so that they didn't have to bend down to rummage through their pots and pans cupboard to get the right one out. So now it just hangs on a hook on the wall, and it's easily accessible. They don't have to bend down. Again, little modifications that we're making to make the environment more safe. In a case where an individual has some sort of cognitive impairment, there's always a fear of what happens if the stove gets left on. And I'm going to share a resource at the end of the slide, or at the end of the presentation, where there are products out there where after a certain amount of time, they will shut the oven off automatically. So there are products out there. You just have to be a little bit tech savvy, get online, search around, read consumer reviews of different products, but there's lots of different modifications that we can make. Also, for an older adult, standing up to make a meal can be a little taxing on the body at times. So make sure that the older adult maybe has an area where they can sit down and chop their vegetables for their meal instead of having to stand, or perhaps creating more counter space with an island or an added shelf that they can spread out so that they aren't cluttered, so that a knife doesn't accidentally fall off the countertop and land on their foot, something of that nature. So again, kind of observe the loved one as they make a meal or move about the kitchen to see what cupboards, what drawers are they using most frequently, and can we put all of the stuff that they're using most frequently in the most accessible, safe range for them. So if we move on from the kitchen, we're going to enter the bedroom next. And again, an area older adults spend a lot of time in. We all spend a lot of time sleeping in our bedrooms for most people. Some have a favorite chair in the living room or something of that nature. But when we think about the bedroom, again, go to those spots that they use most frequently. For some older adults, they may have difficulty standing up out of bed or getting into bed at night if the bed is too high. So consider having the older adult stand with their back towards the bed like they're about to sit down, and then observe how they get in and out of bed. So, for example, their knees should be at a 90-degree angle in an ideal world. So if they're having to get into a bed that's really low, it might be difficult for them to get up. Or if they're having to climb up into bed, that might be difficult. So they make these great plastic bed risers. You can get them at most home, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, those types of places. They're just simple little, they almost look like cones, and you can set them underneath all 4 bedposts to rise it up a little bit. Or you could add an extra layer of foam underneath the mattress, in between the mattress and the box spring, to lift the bed up a little bit. There's a lot of different strategies that are low cost, but getting in and out of bed is so important. Again, going back to helping them remain independent. I'm sure they would much rather spend a couple dollars to adjust the height of the bed as opposed to having somebody coming into the home and helping them up out of bed every morning. So we're thinking through, again, those areas of the home that are most frequently used. So when we think about the bedroom, do they have access to a telephone in case of emergency? Do they have a personal response system on? Those buttons, a lot of times they have necklaces or bracelets in case of an emergency. So when we think about home modifications, it's not necessarily just the physical items of the home. We want to make sure that help is accessible at any point in the home as well. So families will definitely want to consider a personal response, emergency response system for their loved one. And then making sure, again, those pathways are clear. A lot of times there are rugs in the bedroom that create an issue. And again, this is an area where we might be able to rearrange a little bit of furniture to create more room. Where I see this becoming a problem most frequently is when a walker is introduced for the first time, or a wheelchair. We want to make sure that the older adult can use the walker to get around the bed or to get to the bathroom. Sometimes I've seen the older adult put the walker to the side and use the bed and the wall to kind of shuffle to the bathroom. That's not an ideal situation. So can we move the bed a little bit and maybe move the nightstand to the other side of the bed to create some more room? So again, think outside the box. Get a little creative when we're thinking about the different areas of the home. So the next room of the house is probably where the most common falls occur. And that's the bathroom. So again, I don't know about you, but I cringe when I look at this picture because I see the throw rug, I see the shower curtain. Somebody must have pulled on that. Maybe they were falling. The water looks really, really hot. The medications are up kind of high. There's high things up on the shelf that maybe they need access to. So again, this is a room of the house where I often tell family members to start first, because again, this is where falls are most likely to occur. Actually, 96% of injuries usually occur in the bathroom. And this is an area that does get slippery and wet. People are standing up for a long period of time if they're in the shower. So we want to make sure that grab bars are readily available near the tub, near the shower, near the toilet. We want to make sure that they are very secure. Oftentimes you'll see in an older adult's home that they've tried to use that towel bar as a grab bar, or maybe if the vanity is right next to the toilet, they've opened that bottom cabinet door and they've used the door to stand up. So you might see that that door is a little wobbly. So again, pay attention to where things are. A quick fix for the toilet is a toilet riser, and you can purchase those fairly easily. That makes the toilet seat a little bit higher so that they don't have to exert as much energy to get up and down off of the toilet. And there are great shower benches, shower curtains that even have a slit for the tub so that there's not excess water draining onto the floor. So again, we want to just think about the environment and what's going to create the most potential for a fall, or what are the potential hazards. Next, we're going to talk about the hallways. And again, this is kind of an area of the home that people don't always pay attention to, but it's an area that we frequent all the time because we have to pass through this hallway to get to where we're going. So we want to make sure that there's adequate lighting in the hallway, and this is where motion-censored night lights can be really helpful. So we can plug those in along the walkway, maybe to the bathroom, so that the older adult doesn't necessarily have to find the light, but the path to the bathroom is well lit. Another thing you might not consider in your hallway, but are really important, are those smoke detectors. And as you can see here, that's one of the hazards. It's beeping up at the top. So we want to make sure that the smoke detectors are working. We want to test them regularly. And if an older adult can't install it themselves, if they don't have anyone around, most local fire departments will come out and install a smoke detector. And the Red Cross also has a program, and I'm going to share that at the end on my resource slide, where they will provide a free smoke detector and someone to install it. So something else to consider are the doorways in a hallway, especially again when those walkers or wheelchairs are introduced. You might want to consider replacing the standard hinge on a door with one that's called a swing clear hinge, which helps the door swing more fully around, which actually gives the older adult a couple, almost an inch, I would say, more room in that walkway. So as opposed to having to widen the doorway and spend a lot of money, you might want to try that type of hinge first. Again, it's called a swing clear hinge. So then another room of the house is the laundry room, and this might be in a basement in many cases. And of course, the main hazard here is an older adult walking up and down the stairs with a clothes basket. I have unfortunately had clients, people come to us because their loved one has had a fall as a result of trying to get down the stairs with their laundry basket. And that's an easy task that people can get help for, but we want to make sure, again, thinking about maintaining the independence of the individual, make sure that there are secure handrails. And there are oftentimes alternatives to a laundry basket. I know when I went to college, I had kind of a cloth hamper with handles. So I only had to hold on to the handle when I lugged it across campus. So that might be a better option, or carrying it down in small batches. And then, of course, there's the risk of detergent spills, or is the detergent on a shelf that's above the washer that's difficult for the older adult to get down. And I know everyone likes to save money by buying the ginormous Costco-sized laundry detergents. So if you think about that, I mean, sometimes it's even hard for me to get it up off the shelf. Think about an older adult who might be a little more frail. So can we move that to a lower shelf? Maybe we provide them a measuring cup that they can pour it into and then put it into the laundry. Little things, again, these little things, and we already have the tools at our fingertips to create some of these easy solutions. And again, stairway clutter is always something else to consider. And then the final room of the house that I want to talk about is the garage. So many people have a stair or two up and down into the garage. And while you might not think that that creates a hazard for somebody with mobility issues, it might be a little intimidating, or it might cause a possible fall, because oftentimes those couple stairs do not have a handrail. So consider putting in a handrail, or maybe even a grab bar that the older adult can hold on to as they go up and down the stairs. This is another place where a lot of power tools, chemicals are housed. And if there's any sort of cognitive impairment, that might pose a hazard to the individual. They might not know how to use those tools anymore, or might misinterpret it for another something else, such as a jug of milk when it's actually the can of oil, something of that sort. Obviously, we don't want any of those types of things to happen, so we want to make sure that those items are locked up and are secure. Or maybe just the garage door needs a new lock. Maybe it needs to be above the head so the older adult with cognitive impairment doesn't see it at eye level and try to unlock it, that sort of thing. And then when we talk about the trash, is it piling up? Does the older adult have a good system in place for taking out the trash? Or have they contacted their local trash collecting company to see if they can leave the trash can right outside the garage door. Sometimes the company will come up to the garage door for older adults to get the trash and then again put the empty trash can back by the garage door to eliminate the need for the older adult to take it down the sidewalk. So again, things to consider. And then there's always the question of when to take away the keys. And this is a really difficult conversation to have. Of course, somebody with cognitive impairment, this could create many hazards. So there's a great website called letstalkaboutdriving.com where you can find some great resources on having that conversation. But there's a whole other webinar on that topic, so I don't want to derail us too much. But again, trying to think about every room of the home, walk through the older adult's daily routine to get families thinking about what are some proactive things we can do to help mom or dad or aunt or uncle or my loved one stay independent, keep their daily routine, because really that's what we want to do when we're having this conversation. And I just had a few more other safety concerns. I've touched on a lot of these, but just kind of wanted to recap a little bit. When we talk about the surfaces in the home, floors, counters, stairs, we want to make sure that they're free of clutter. We don't want to use polish on a wood floor because it might make it slippery. Or if that's the case, we might want to consider socks with a non-skid sole or really well-fitted shoes for that older adult so that they don't have a slip or a fall. And then we've talked a lot about that clutter. This is a great opportunity to talk about cleaning out closets, drawers. Maybe we need to install some new bookshelves for them to display their precious trinkets or whatever they like to call them in their environment instead of having them piled up everywhere. And we want to encourage wide pathways, again, especially if there's a walker or a wheelchair so that they can safely navigate through the home. And then a lazy Susan is actually a great thing to have on the countertop. Then they can swivel it around to get to the items they need. And then we need to think about lighting and glare. I've already talked about the use of night lights. I've heard some families have success with rope lighting. They kind of stapled it down into the carpet for their loved one with cognitive impairment. They made a path from the bed to the bathroom, and it helped their loved one safely navigate there. You might consider having a clap on, clap off. I'm sure we all saw those commercials growing up. And then we want to take a look at the areas of the home. Do they have adequate lighting? And not just during the daytime, but at night. Also consider, again, the changes in the seasons. In the winters, we have shorter amounts of daylight. So if lights are on timers, we need to adjust them for the winter months. Again, accessibility. We want to make sure that things are at an arm's reach. We don't want older adults to have to step on a stool or reach up high, throwing off their balance, that sort of thing. And then, again, we want to make sure those chemicals, tools are in safe and secure places, especially with if the person has a cognitive impairment, such as Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And then when it comes to the trash, I talked a little bit about that, but sometimes smaller trash cans are a good idea. They may have to make more trips to the bigger trash can in the garage, but hey, that's good exercise. But it also makes that bag of trash more manageable so that they're not lugging a heavy bag of trash, again, throwing off their balance, increasing the hazards in the home. So wanted to run over those. And then I want to talk about a topic that actually came up from the comments that you all submitted last year on this topic, and that is concerns around our furry friends. So our pets, while they can be great companions, they can also be a health risk for older adults. So when we talk about home safety, this comes up a lot. So I did want to address this issue. According to the CDC report, 21,000 older Americans are treated in the emergency room each year due to falls associated with their dogs and cats. And while that's not a huge number, the highest rate of injuries for all pet-related falls are for people over the age of 75, and the most common diagnosis as a result is a fracture. So these are very serious falls, typically when a fall is caused by one of our furry friends. And why are pets a concern? Well, the obvious one is that they're a trip hazard. Oftentimes, they want to be so close to us because they love us so much, and they're always right at our feet. Or perhaps their toys are scattered about the house, and this can cause a fall, or what we call a near fall, where maybe they almost fall but they catch themselves. And those are dangerous too, because they could be a repeat next time, and it might not be a near miss. It might be an actual fall. Untrained dogs may jump up and cause the person to fall backwards. And then when out walking the pet, which of course again is great exercise, I don't want to discourage that, but there is a risk of getting tangled up in the leash. So consider getting your loved one a retractable leash, one that sucks the cord back up into the little plastic doohickey, very technical term. That way it prevents excess leash from creating a trip hazard. So things to consider when keeping a pet. Have a very honest conversation. Be honest about the concerns and the realities of the situation. And if the loved one does have a fall that results in a hospitalization, perhaps the pet needs to live with a relative for a short period of time before returning to the home while the person, the older adult, recuperates from their injury. Or maybe the agreement is, okay, the fall happened in the kitchen while you were cooking. You tripped when you went to turn to go to the refrigerator and the dog was right under your feet. So maybe now we need to put up some sort of barrier and the dog can no longer be in the kitchen while you're cooking. Again, helping them maintain their independence, but helping them to also be smart and safe about having a pet in the home. And then watch those interactions. Observe when the pet is putting the older adult at risk. Consider an obedience training for the dog if they're really kind of out of control. But you could also consider a pet helper, maybe a neighbor, a home care company. I know a lot of our caregivers at Home Instead help with furry friends in the home. Maybe you consider a dog walker. Get some of that energy out with the dog walker so that when they come home, they're a little more tame and can be around the older adult. Again, want to be reducing that risk. And then just constantly be on the lookout for pet items around the home and tidying up after that. But what if the pet is not safe in the home? Well, we need to consider adoption, maybe having a friend or relative adopt or donating the dog to the dog or cat to the shelter. Find an alternate. Maybe if they do have to give it up for adoption, we get them enrolled in some sort of pet therapy program, or maybe they can start donating items or their time at a local pet shelter. And then one thing that happens is that the caregiver often feels guilty. So we need to remind caregivers that while this is hard, they shouldn't feel overly guilty because they're removing an animal who couldn't be well cared for or who was putting their older adult loved one at risk. And while, yes, this can be sad that they have to part ways as a pet and an owner, but when you look at it in the context of the big picture, safety really needs to be a priority. And it could also be adding to the stress of the family caregiver. They're having to take care of mom, but also take care of her dog. And if you think about it, is it all really worth it? Especially if you've done everything you can to help this older adult maintain the benefits of having a pet. You've talked through the option of, okay, when you're cooking, they can't be in the kitchen, but the older adult doesn't adhere to that, or it just isn't working out. I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but if you're able to find the pet a good home and maybe find ways for that person to still interact with animals, hopefully it can help make that transition easier. And there are a few more barriers that I come across most frequently. And first of all, older adults are very fiercely independent. I don't know if any of you know an older adult who's fiercely independent, but talking to them about any issue, especially the home safety and their independence, can sometimes be met with confrontation. But solutions to this would be explain reasons for why you're trying to modify the home and approach it in a positive way. For example, putting in a grab bar can help you maintain your independence so you can shower on your own, as opposed to having to have someone come in, or you can even have the conversation. If we're not able to make some modifications, the alternative is moving. And do you really want to move? And sometimes it takes an outsider making a recommendation. Maybe it's the physician suggesting, or a clinician, or maybe a family friend who've had a positive experience in making a home modification, using that story to introduce the topic. Older adults may not want to do the modifications because of the impact that it will have on the aesthetics of the home. Some very prim and proper older adults who take a lot of pride in their home don't want to put an ugly grab bar. But they do make really cool looking grab bars these days. My grandparents have really beautiful ones actually, and it matches their decor. You would never really know that it's a grab bar. Older adults might also fear asking for help will indicate that they can't handle living on their own. And I mentioned this at the very beginning of the presentation. They might think that by asking for help or making modifications expedites their nursing home stay or will put them on the fast track to assisted living placement. But that's not the case. Again, we want to make sure that we're having a conversation about the changes and how the older adult wants to do the exact opposite of move them, but instead wants to adapt the environment so that they can stay there longer. But I will say, when we're talking with families, we want to tell them, we want to be very cautionary and hesitant when promising that they'll never have to go to another place. Oh, Mom, I'll never put you in a nursing home, because you never know what kind of care the loved one is needed. So we want family caregivers to avoid making those types of promises because we just never know what the future will hold. And older adults might also have emotional connections to hazardous items, maybe a throw rug that was passed down to them or they got on one of their excursions to Europe, something of that nature. But we can always try to find other uses for them. Maybe instead of putting it on the floor, we can hang it on the wall as decor or put it in a room that maybe is not as frequently used. And then finally, cognitive impairment and dementia can definitely be a barrier in home safety. Older adults might not be cognizant of hazards in the home if they have a cognitive impairment. They might forget to report accidents like falls or small kitchen fires. And families sometimes have to create, or might have to get creative rather, when coming up with home safety solutions and maybe even provide more around-the-clock care to keep that person safe. So I know I'm running a little short on time and I still have some slides I want to get to, but I want to touch briefly on communication around this. I know I've talked a lot about communication, but some of the highlights are listed here. We don't want to argue with the older adult. We really want to maintain their dignity and respect throughout the conversation and really approach it as a team approach. Involve the older adult in the solutions. Ask them, do you feel safe at home? Are there areas you feel unsafe or less safe? Or, okay, you're struggling with this. How would you like to modify it? And see what their suggestions are. They might know what they need to do, but just haven't taken the steps to get there. And then we also need to be empathetic. Again, aging is not always hard, or not always easy. It can be hard for some people, admitting that they need help. They feel like their independence is compromised. So have empathy, put yourselves in their shoes, and really listen to them and to their concerns. So now I'm going to run through these resources. Again, I apologize running a little short on time. Please download the slides so that you get all of these great resources. But that MakingHomeSaferForSeniors.com has this home safety checklist that will walk you through each room of the house. There's also some great fixes under $500. I also get asked all the time about funding options for home modifications. Of course, the easiest way is private pay, just out-of-pocket paying for those grab bars and whatnot. But there are some low-interest loans, home improvement grants. There are some great volunteer programs within certain communities. There might even be organizations that loan equipment. And then in the blue box are some resources. I in no way am endorsing these specific programs or whatnot, but I did want to make you aware of them because these websites do have some really great information on home modifications. The VA, Medicare benefits actually have very, very limited home modifications, and they might only be covered after a fall or injury has occurred. So again, things to consider and look into. And then on the next slide, those websites, Making Home Safer for Seniors, your local area agency on aging is a great one to reach out to. Sorry, again, I'm going through these quickly, but you can download the slides to get these, and you can visit each of the websites. And then finally, this first bullet, Fall Prevention Conversation Guide for Caregivers, is a great way to talk to loved ones about falls and preventing falls. So you can find it on either of those, the National Alliance for Caregiving and the National Association. I'm blanking on the association, but it's a great tool and resource. If driving is an issue, there's the website there. That free smoke detector I talked about. The automatic stove shutoff is there as well. And you can always call your local home instead office for a home safety evaluation, or if you think, we really need some help in the home. Having home care come in can be a great option. And then you can also consult a certified aging in place specialist if you would like. So again, lots of great resources, lots of great information. And Steve, I'm so sorry I only left time for probably like one question, but I do want to turn it back to you, Steve, for questions at this time. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Okay, thanks very much, Lakeland. Great presentation. Yeah, we got a time. We'll get a couple quick ones in here if we can. First question here for you, Lakeland. Can you please talk about how the primary caregiver can communicate with the secondary one about some of these issues? My way or the highway is not really a helpful solution.
Yeah, and when there are multiple caregivers involved, if they can develop a regular cadence for communication, that is wonderful. Sometimes people keep a journal where they journal, but there are lots of apps out there that are great for communicating. When it comes to home safety issues specifically, especially if they are ones that will need, any sort of construction or a high cost, it's always good to sit down with the older adult if they're cognitively able to participate in the conversation. Sit down with multiple family members or the primary caregiver, the secondary caregiver, to figure out the best way to address that home safety issue. Open, honest communication, again, and communicating the reason behind the home modification, and again, communicating that the older adult's best interest is truly at the top of mind when making these decisions. It's to help them maintain their independence and stay at home, as opposed to an alternative of moving. So hopefully those various tips can help that situation, but good question.
Okay, next question here, Lakeland, real quick. My parents do not take suggestions or advice well from me. How can I get their doctor to order a VN to come out and assess their home and then make safety suggestions? I'm sure they would listen to her much better than me.
That's a great question. I would call your loved one's physician's office before an appointment and talk to them about your concerns. See if there's an option for maybe an occupational therapist to come out and assess the home, or perhaps the physician's office or the hospital system has a social worker who could come out and assess. But yeah, having a third party come in and assess. You could always call your local home instead office too. They do a free care consult where they'll do a little home safety check. Sometimes hearing it from a third party can really be eye-opening to the older adult. Sometimes they might think that their loved one is they might be stubborn, or they might not be willing to admit to their loved one that, yes, okay, I do need that, but they might be more willing to accept it when it comes from someone else. So I'm sorry that you're going through that. That's a tough situation, but hopefully those tips can help you.
Okay, Lakeland. Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time here, but I want to thank you for a great presentation and for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.